Looks like yours just.
I surf the internet all day at work.
It's your work that was a good.
Yeah, I work today. I work in software.
Hooray!
Work like I do normally have to work.
Oh my goodness, all of my windows are so scrunched.
You say you work in Swarthmore?
I do.
I'm actually sort of half based in Philly.
Oh, cool. Where at?
I run a residency program at the Factory.
Oh,
in West Philly.
and
One of our
hopefully
professors,
there's no
one
private.
of our faculty staff.
Tara.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, if you have to front check out any of her work, but from what I've seen on the it's pretty cool.
Sweet.
Yes. I mean, both. Thanks, Izzy.
Yeah, she's great. She does good work.
Cool. David Hill.
It's not our
Oh, yeah.
A lot more.
probably wait one more minute and then start if that's okay.
Shout outs to Modplug.
Yeah, shout outs to Modplug and Trackers. Renoise also.
Yes,
I was just talking to him about Renoise yesterday.
What should I say?
Oh, I suppose I could put like up a thing that says what my name is and stuff.
Here? Great.
That's good.
Why you delete it?
Cause I'm trying to think of something a little more clever. I'll figure it out later. Do you wanna start now?
Yeah, we can start.
Okay. So the way we're going to do this, I guess, is I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, sort of about some of my background making stuff, some like games that I was inspired by. It's kind of informal, but yeah, I'll just show a bunch of stuff, and then Isaac will do some of that for about 15 minutes, and then we can sort of open up and talk about whatever you guys want to talk about if you have any questions. And I also want to talk about some like software that is like more accessible and like issues with like accessibility in terms of the design of like, you know, what are called DAWs or digital audio workstations and things like that, and also music games. And so I'll just get started. This is how I kind of got my start doing stuff with games. I was on this website called ocremix.org, which was like, I don't know if any of you guys remember that site, but it was like kind of remixes of video game or rearrangements of video game music. And I think I had started originally making like MIDI files for like my Wolfenstein 3D mod that I had. And there's a program, I don't know if it's still around, it's called Anvil Studio, that kind of like was a free MIDI program that I used. But I got into the site OC Remix and I was like blown away that people were making like MP3s, like there's like actual audio samples there. And that's when I got into tracking, and I realized there's actually like a really long history of this. Like it was really big in sort of the demo scene in the late 80s and early 90s in Europe and Scandinavia, and this was like one of the free softwares that still works pretty well today. It's pretty much the same as it was 12 years ago when I made this tune. This was one of the first things I made. It was a remix of Forest of Illusion from Super Mario World, and as you can see, like on the right, it's kind of like not very well parsable for a lot of musicians, but the one cool thing about the tracker is you can make stuff like really fast. So on the left, like the different channels are sort of the different instrument channels or the different like samples, and you can load a sample, like the number that's right after the note. The first thing is the note and the octave. The second thing is the number of the sample, and then there's like volume level and effects on it. And that's basically it. And there's a lot of like features like that, you know, that like add like reverb or whatever, and you can do sort of like fake effects. But yeah, Yeah, you can see like me fading in and fading out stuff by like controlling the volume there, and some of the X is like panning stuff. But yeah, anyway, this was sort of like my weird thing that I did when I was like 15, and then I sort of picked up this other program that's called Ryerson, which is what I've been using for a long time, and I'll open it up later, but I'll just show some, let's see. So I did the music for, where's the folder? I did the music for the game Dysphoria, which I'm sure many of you guys have played, and that's kind of like more of a, that's one of the ways that I got into making music, and I kind of wanted to do something different by that point. Like, so I started collecting sounds for a really long time from kind of like strange or unconventional sources, and like one of them was how I got sounds for this like game that you know hasn't happened with it, but it was a friend's game, and essentially like the idea behind the sounds were all the monster sounds are like if you load in data files to like a sampler, like which Modplug will do, and like Audacity and some other free programs, that it will make these like really bizarre, it'll spit out these bizarre like distorted kind of things, and some of them have kind of melodies embedded in them. So like I had one idea where it was like it sounded kind of like this, where the each of them were pitched sort of on the same key, and let's see. And it was just these very strange sounds, and that was supposed to sort of communicate something about the kind of like unparsability of the world, or just like strangeness. Because I kind of wanted to do something like a little different. And I guess I've always been just interested in that, like uses of sound. So in like Dysphoria, one of the things that I was really into was there was I can't remember the name of the piece, but it was in the movie. It was a Gus Van Sant movie called Last Days. It's supposedly about Kurt Cobain, but it's like fictionalized. And there's a part sort of before, like he kind of, you know, is driven to suicide or whatever, where there's this piece that keeps playing, which is just like this like kind of tape loop piece. I think it was called The Doors of Perception, but it was about just, it was all these like people opening and closing doors and like these murmurs and stuff, and just that you got this really sort of unsettled feeling because it sort of crescendoed, and it was all these kind of mundane environmental sounds that had been kind of amplified. So that was kind of the idea behind doing the sound for Dysphoria, and also that each, because there were about 4 discrete different levels, like that each little snippet would be kind of part of the same melody that would kind of progress as you moved through the game. So this is the title theme, which has a lot of like different layers of stuff in of different sounds that I've sort of accumulated. And there's this like really big sound that is actually the sound I got from freesound.org, which me and Isaac will both talk about a little more later. It's a sound of a metal door trying to be opened that I just put backwards and like pitched to be in the key of this song, and it adds this like really strange, unpredictable, kind of unexpected tone to the beginning of this game. And I guess that's like, that was part of my interest with just making sound design for games, because I feel like there's often a kind of like very like one kind of idea of what exactly kinds of things that you're making. Like I feel like a lot of interactive audio stuff is interactive in the way that's kind of like empowering, but in a shallow way, or kind of like relaxing music, but it isn't necessarily like integrated. It isn't like a game where all these other ideas are kind of going on at once, and I like the idea of all these things sort of being integrated together. And some of the games that I have responded most to are things where the audio has almost been like almost seems incidental, but is very much sort of part of the complete package of the game. And I'll show a couple of those in a bit. But so yeah, this is like so like the design of this sounds had to do with kind of what I wanted to like communicate about the character, which was like only sort of communicated in the game itself and the mechanics, and trying to like bring out some sort of emotional or complicated element that you don't necessarily get from the really simple mechanics of the game. So like all this like bizarre like coming in and out crowd sounds. There's like a synth that just plays the F and C chord that is like really tentative kind of sounding, and it gets kind of less tentative over time. This is the first time a sort of like melody comes up in the piece, but it's kind of like an aimless melody that's just kind of like riding the wave of whatever's there. So that's like the sound work for Dysphoria, and I've done other stuff. I've done some more like sound effect kind of stuff for this game called Crypt Worlds, which is like a freeware game. It's kind of has a cult following online, but it's a very strange game. Let me see if I can find a video of it just so you can see really quickly like what kind of game this is. Crypt Worlds. And yeah, okay. This is the official walkthrough. Let's see, is there talking on this?
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay, there's talking on this one. I'm trying to get just like something that has the sound. I could just like try to run the game. But yeah, anyway, the idea like is this very odd, bizarre kind of game where you're like, let me see if I can just open it up. I think it's in my desktop is extremely disorganized, as you can tell. Okay, here's an old build of it, I think. And basically, you're just wandering around this like sort of 3D world and kind of interacting with these objects, and it's kind of like. I guess could be described as like bizarre and quirky. So I kind of wanted to do sounds that fit that. I think I've beaten the game right now, but it's like very simple sounds, and you just wander around. It's this really strange low-res world, but I wanted there to be kind of a personality there. And so what I did is just made like a huge pile of sounds that I sent to Lilith, who made the game, and she kind of integrated them how she liked in the game. So like if you pick up something, it makes this like really obnoxious sound. Oh god, it's not making the sound. I think it's because I like beat the game. Well, that's not a great example, but I can at least play the sounds to you. But yeah, like so I don't know if any of you played the game. Probably recognize there's like a lot of like voices in the game, and I went to Free Sound, and I had just gotten this like really bizarre kind of sample of this dude, like field recording of this dude from Portugal talking to this woman at like around like the airport or something, and this is what it sounds like.
É do tempo isto. Pois não. Não, quando está assim não vale a pena.
So like that, like 10 seconds is the entirety of like all the vocal samples in Crypt Worlds when you talk to people, and like some of them are sped up or played down. But like I liked the idea that this game that was just so strange that like you just like throw some random clips of people talking in Portuguese, and apparently they're saying very like mundane things like the weather's nice today or something like that. But like I guess I like the idea of like using the sound to sort of almost like speak to what was going on in the game, and like sort of interrogating the game and kind of challenging it, and like adding things to its world. And I think that's like one use of sound that I feel like doesn't get talked about a lot. I feel like what often gets talked about is like where is it? Oh, Super Mario glitches. I have so many things open at once. Oh, okay, here we go. So like Proteus is an example of like a game that a lot of people talk about, and Proteus is a really cool and interesting game if the video will work. Okay. And like Proteus, like you do is basically wander around this sort of wilderness like world, and there are like all these little discrete objects that you interact with, and they all have interactions on the sound. It doesn't run this slow on the thing. It's probably just like the computer and the projector. But there's essentially no goal, and the interesting thing about the sound Oh, I think I'm playing something at the same. Oh yes. Wow, that's kind of awesome. I did not intend on doing that, but that was crazy. Or not. I won't use that word. It was quite interesting. But Proteus is really cool, and like I really like it. And they did a lot of work into essentially like all. So how it works musically is like there's just a bunch of different like discrete files that loads from that correspond to the different like objects and things that you interact with, and like they each have their kind of own musical character, and everything is in the same key like musically. I don't know if you noticed that. So it kind of gives the sense that these things are sort of harmonically connected, which is definitely what this game is trying to get across. But I often feel like what ends up happening with these kinds of things is that the audio is like almost there to like cleanse the game, or like it's there to kind of save something or make it kind of feel more powerful or whatever. Whereas I think like I'm interested, maybe it's because I'm partly a game designer and like also interested in stuff that kind of like brings out or brings to light or sort of challenges the player's relationship with the game, and sometimes that can be use of very kind of interesting interactive audio. I mean, there are like AAA games that do interactive audio pretty well too. Like I was watching a talk on Alien Isolation, which like is a recent AAA game where the alien sort of like you're on a ship and the alien follows you around and attacks you. The soundtrack is completely interactive. The way that they designed it, they integrated it into the systems of the game, which so it's not like these. So like all the events that happen and the way that the soundtrack kind of swells based around the way that you sort of interact with the alien in the game, which I think is really interesting. And even if you look at like some big like AAA games like even Call of Duty or whatever, like the sound is really important. Like it's actually what kind of like gives like sort of like a tactileness to what you're actually playing, and like it's the thing that like the guy who's the designer of Alien Isolation, I can't remember his name, he's saying that the music or the sound is sort of a shortcut to your brain. Like if you hear like a sound recording of like machine gun fire, and I don't know where the video is.
You may just need to click on it.
Yeah. I don't know what it's not. But anyway, you all know what those games sound like. The sound like if you hear just the sound recording of like gunfire and all that stuff, you'll sort of sense it as being kind of a continuous experience. But if you see it with the sound off and like that's not there while you're experiencing something, it almost feels wrong. Like your ears like almost don't trick you as much, or they do so much to kind of like add a feeling, a tangible feeling to this world. And I feel like horror games in particular do this really well, where the sound is extremely important kind of indicator to like what's kind of going on in your environment. One of the classic examples is like Silent Hill, where you have the radio that you walk around and it sort of swells when you get near monsters, and when you walk away from them, it kind of like settles back into this like normal state. But I think the thing that I guess I wanted to get across is like I don't necessarily think it's really uncontroversial, I feel like, or at least it should be, to say that like sound is important in games. Like that should be just a given. Like the problem or the thing that we should be talking about is how to use it, and not just use it in a way that is like saying that is like interactive audio or some of that stuff, which is very interesting, but I often feel like kind of goes in the territory of like trying to be like a sound tool or an audio tool, but not sort of quite getting there. And like the way to bridge that gap between like digital audio workstations and these tools has often been like a really difficult sort of problem, because a lot of these like digital audio workstations that you use like are really inaccessible for a lot of people. But yeah, I guess just quick look through, like here's some games that inspired me sound-wise, and kind of like odd choices, but that I just remember. I really liked the sound effects for Wario Land 1. I don't know why, they're just like very abrupt and like very clipped, and just sort of add to the feeling of like the things that you're interacting with, and that was sort of the kind of inspiration for some of the abruptness of the sound effects in Crypt Worlds, and it's not something that you would necessarily notice when you're watching it. You just perceive it as being sort of part of the experience. But I think that's valuable, and I think that's kind of like an unsung like element of sound design where people just don't even notice this kind of stuff to really talk about it. There's another game that I like the sound design for. The one thing I like about Banjo-Kazooie is each of the characters you talk to, because there's no like vocal samples. It's just like random sound effects, and like some of the characters will just make sounds like when they're talking, and I really like that like each character sort of has their own sound character or like timbre of sound that's associated with them, because it does a lot to kind of build the feeling of the game, maybe even more than like voice acting does, but it's a really interesting use of limitations. The other thing I like about this game is that a lot of that you might not remember like having played this game is that it has like interactive audio in it. The music changes based on like the kind of environment you're in. Like it's the same theme here, but it just changed seamlessly into sort of the water theme. And then you get out, like there's a different sort of small version of the theme, and that adds a lot to the kind of the environment. And like that there's some sort of cohesiveness to the environment, but it's also like but then each area sort of has its own character that's really well defined by the sound. Let's see one.
Can I just make a bookmark later for you to talk more about that, of creating different versions of a sound when you go for different environments? That's going to be a question I have.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I'll talk more about it later. I'm just running through stuff now so I can give Isaac a chance to talk. Here's an old game that maybe a lot of people haven't played. It's for Amiga, but it has interactive audio in it. You're basically programming different emotions into this android, and you're on the left side and the CPU is on the right side, but the different elements that you interact with and the sort of mood is kind of interactive. And it was done on sort of like tracker modules back in the late 80s, I think, is when this game came out. But I think that the way that this game uses audio is pretty interesting. It's one of the kind of early examples that I see of that. That's Super Mario Brothers Corruptions. Even like Metroid was one of the first games where like they intentionally sort of tried to design sound that music that was alienating. Like there's some old music in games that is alienating, but this was like intentionally designed this way. And so you go and there's the kind of normal theme, but then you go into this area and it has this very strange kind of like non-tonal music playing. And it kind of gives this environment of like inscrutability or mystery to it through this like just very subtle and like minimal uses of sound. One other sound that I think is like really let's see. Oh yeah, that's Earthbound is one of my favorite. The soundtrack of Earthbound is amazing and it's kind of has its own character, but what I like about it is it's so integrated into the game, it's kind of impossible to think about Earthbound without thinking about the game and like thinking about the entire sort of package of what that means and like what your relationship with it is. And like for a game that has such an extensive soundtrack that's also such its like own distinct character, its character fits so well into the game, and I feel like it's something that is done so little. But oh yeah, and this is Donkey Kong Country and Danny Brown mashup. Anyway, you get the idea. It's pretty cool. So let's see. I think that's all I essentially wanted to talk about now. But we'll get to some more issues of like accessibility and what tools to use and that kind of stuff later. But I guess what I wanted to get across is just that there are all kinds of ways to use sound in games that are interesting, and we might not like necessarily notice it or know how to talk about it, but it's still like really important and valuable as part of the experience. So, I don't know. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Should we do the musical chairs thing?
Yeah. Well, let me switch this.
Actually,
off
it looks like I'm still in frame if I'm here.
You're okay.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just sit here then.
Okay, let me give you HDMI. Behind the back pass.
Moments of truth.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Oh, except I get more room on my screen.
Oh.
That's cool.
Just that one.
And just, what are you doing? Yes, use that device. Okay. And let me make sure. Okay. Oh. Okay, let me just test, see if this works. Okay,
Cool.
good. Great. So, let me bring up my super professional intro. So this is me. I'm Isaac Shankler. I'm a composer. That's my info, my email, my Twitter, my website. And I sort of kind of a double life as a person who writes music for video games and a person who writes, I don't know what the in vogue term is most recently, but contemporary classical music or experimental music or concert music or art music, all of which are kind of less than ideal terms, but there you go. So these are some of the games I've written music for: Analog: A Hate Story, Hate Plus, Red Shirt, and Depression Quest, and there are a lot of kind of influences that go into it, that go into these things, but I decided that I would rather just kind of focus in on one thing. So today I'm just going to talk about the music for Depression Quest and the kind of process that I went through with that, and what I ended up with, what I thought worked well, what I'm still kind of hesitant about in some ways, and some of the larger issues that come into play specifically with that game and the music for that game. And I was really interested in the audio games panel that was just before, and some of the issues brought up there I think are also kind of overlapping. I think it was Decky Koss who brought up the idea of music as manipulation, and that's something I think about a lot because that's not something I want to do, but it's something that's almost I don't want to say inevitable, but there is kind of a power to music and a power to sound that's very immediate. Our brain processes sound much faster than we process vision, for example. So it's almost like our reaction to sound is sometimes almost reflexive. And so when I was talking to, so I'm going to talk about Depression Quest in that context. So Depression Quest, if you don't know, is a game designed by Zoe Quinn and Patrick Lindsay, and it's meant to kind of simulate the experience of what it's like to go through clinical depression. And I was really like motivated to be a part of this project and write music for this project. Also extremely daunted by it. So the main sort of gameplay mechanism, if I can use that word, is that it's sort of a second-person narrative, and then you have certain choices, and if you're too depressed, there are literally choices that are crossed out that you can't even do, even though you see them there. Maybe most of you are familiar with it, but I just figured I would go over it anyway, just in case. So when I was working on the music for this, I really didn't want to do the music as a manipulation thing. And maybe kind of an alternate way of thinking about it or conceiving about it would be music as empathy. The difference being, and maybe it's just a semantic difference, but the difference being music as manipulation is maybe trying to get someone to feel something that you don't really feel. Whereas music as empathy is you feel something and you want to share that with someone. Or, however, I think you do have kind of an increased, I don't know if responsibility is the right word, but there's other issues I think that come up when you want people to feel something negative, something like depression, anguish or anxiety, or even lack of feeling, which is a characteristic of depression. So I wanted to avoid doing something that was, this is how you should feel about this, you know. And so I thought a lot about how different music represents sadness. And there's this kind of dichotomy in our culture, and there's some argument about whether this is universal or whether it's just Western music, between music that's in a major key and music in a minor key. And this is kind of a basic division, but in general, people, there's this association that I tend to think is cultural with major music that's music in a major key that's happy, music in a minor key is sad. And because these things rely on cultural associations, I wanted to sort of not even think about that or try and not necessarily go beyond that, but to think about it in a different way. And so I thought back to music before there was this kind of major-minor distinction, or before people thought of things that way, and to medieval music and Renaissance music. And so Guillaume Dufay is a medieval-era composer. Like most composers at that time, wrote a lot of vocal music, mostly vocal music, things like motets. And the interesting thing about it, you know, from our standpoint now, is that this music doesn't really have the same kind of major-minor distinction. It's more in this what's called a modal kind of feeling. So it's not strictly major or strictly minor, and the harmonies don't move in quite the same way. So we don't have quite the same associations with them. It's a little alien to us in that way. So I'm going to play. This is short, so maybe I'll play the whole thing. I'll play part of it. But this is a motet by Guillaume Dufay. Uh-oh. Of course. Here we go. That's actually a good place to stop. So even without playing the whole thing, you can maybe sense that, you know, the harmonies move a little different, and while there is kind of maybe a melancholy aspect to it, it's not like you must feel sad. You know, it's not that kind of heavy-handed in quite the same way. And so that became sort of my model. I actually literally used this piece as a harmonic model for my music in Depression Quest. And then kind of as a textural model, Arvo Pärt is a living composer, a minimalist composer who writes. He started out writing very, very dense, difficult, what you might call difficult music, and then sort of did a 180 or near 180 and started writing this very sparse, very beautiful music. And so I'll play a little bit of that. Sometimes holy minimalism is the term for him and a few other composers, because there's this kind of spiritual, or there's meant to be, at least in their conception of it, there's this spiritual aspect to it. And maybe I'll reload this one too. Yeah. I really hate to be stopping these musical examples, but in the interest of time, so that's kind of the textural model. Also, again, you know, to me, this music has kind of space in it that allows you to emotionally react to it kind of on your own terms, at least to me. So that was kind of the textural model of it. And then kind of going back to the game, I'm going to kind of play through some choices. Probably won't have time to read too much text, but I just want to get a sense of kind of what sound is in the game and how it operates. So. So going back to the top. So you can hear hopefully the harmonic layer that's from the Defy, and then the kind of textural language that's in the upper part, and those two things together. There's kind of a third element which maybe you detected, which is this sort of glitchiness to it, this sort of electronic, sort of sterile electronic aspect to it as well, and that's kind of a result of a few things, but one thing is, Depression Quest is made in Twine, and it's made to run in a browser, and that comes with certain kind of technical limitations. And sort of working through it together with Zoe, we kind of figured out that we could have one track that was looping throughout the game, and then based on certain choices, when certain choices loaded, you could have other audio kind of overlaid on that, but you couldn't really, or at least it would have been much more difficult to have anything sort of start and stop, or have things like sync up in certain ways. That would have been much more difficult and probably outside of the scope of Twine as an engine and HTML. So I decided to build. So the thing is, I could trigger a sound when people got to a page, right? But I wouldn't know when they would be done reading the text and moving on to a different page. So there was always this kind of chance that the sound would be interrupted, and you can hear there's like a little click or a pop or a glitch there. So that was part of the motivation for kind of building little glitches into the framework of the sound itself. And in fact, depending on what mood you're in, if the more the deeper you go into the depression, the more and more glitches there are kind of in the fabric of the sound. The more layers there are in that sense. So those overlaid bits of sound are also, like Liz, from Freesound, and I can sort of show how those are built. Here's one that we didn't get to. I kind of like this one. This is like if you go to a bar, and so again, there's these kind of ambient sounds that correspond roughly to what's happening in the game, and some of them are meant to be vaguely soothing, some of them are meant to be vaguely unsettling. The unsettling thing about this one is if you look, it's hard to tell from the overhead speakers, but if you look in the channel, the mixer, that the thumping drum and bass thing is like all in the right channel, which is kind of annoying. If I'm sure you've all experienced that, whether on purpose or by accident. So these tend to be the green things here are software audio, synthesized audio, and then the blue here is audio generally taken from Freesound. So it's this kind of mixture of this kind of sterile electronic audio and more organic sounds. And so the last thing I want to talk about is even just in the piano layer, there's this kind of other layer of kind of the stuttering sound that accompanies it, and that was done in this program called Maximus P, which people use for all kinds of things, for like audio installations. I tend to use it a lot in my other life as an experimental composer. Let's see. So I loaded up a different piano track. Oh, it's not playing back through there. Sorry. Let me set that up real quick. Okay. So this is the audio by itself. And then there's these kind of sporadic glitches that kind of stutters that happen. So that was another kind of way to give texture to the piano layer. And talking about accessibility, Max is unfortunately extremely inaccessible to a lot of people. It has a very sharp learning curve. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. But it is very flexible, which is why I like it. And you can sort of do things, if you know your way around it, you can sort of conceive of things and do things that you wouldn't necessarily ordinarily be able to do in like a tracker or a DAW, in my estimation. So this is kind of this is what I use Maximus P for in my other life. This is a kind of piece for violin and electronics, where the electronics is kind of derived from what the violin is playing. So it initially starts out very sparse. Not that sparse. This is rather quiet. So in the beginning, it's very, very sparse. You can hear just like little bits of sine waves. I don't know why the level of this is so quiet. Then if I go later, so later, the further you get in the piece, the more the analyzed audio gets sort of fed back and analyzed again. So you sort of start to get this cascade of sounds. So now the sound is kind of self-sustaining, and it goes on its own, even without the violin playing. And then later on, it gets much more active. I think somewhere around here. So like maybe the irony of this, or strange thing about this, is that some of my music outside of games is ironically more interactive than my music in games. Not sure how that worked out. But so the last thing I want to talk about is kind of hooking this into larger issues. This is something that Zoe Quinn talks about. I know other people have talked about this. She's certainly not the first person to talk about this, but this is maybe the most blunt statement of it. So fucking what if it isn't fun? So what if games aren't fun? And certainly, again, I think that's an issue with Depression Quest and an issue with the music for Depression Quest. Again, I think if it's not fun, I think there's maybe a greater sense of responsibility or something. Again, I don't want to use that word. Why do I keep using that word? But there's a sense that you should go kind of, you have to kind of do something extra, I think, to justify the non-fun nature of it. And I think that's true of music as well. And so Zoe compares, indie games and alt games to the punk movement in this article. But when she wrote this, when she talked about this, so what if it isn't fun? It immediately reminded me of this connection to this kind of mid 20th century modernist music in music, which had kind of the same attitude of like, so what if music isn't pleasant to listen to? So what if it's not hugely popular? And there's an essay by Milton Babbitt that talks about this. He's a 20th century composer who was kind of a pioneer of electronic music and some other things, and kind of a stodgy guy. So I'll play some of his music to kind of get you in the mood. And I'll read the first couple paragraphs of this. And I apologize in advance for the extremely dated, gendered language. So who cares if you listen? This article might have been titled "The Composer as Specialist," or alternatively, and perhaps less contentiously, "The Composer as Anachronism." For I am concerned with stating an attitude towards the indisputable facts of the status and condition of the composer of what we will, for the moment, designate as serious, advanced contemporary music. The composer expends an enormous amount of time and energy, and usually considerable money, on the creation of a commodity which has little, no, or negative commodity value. He is, in essence, a vanity composer. The general public is largely unaware and uninterested in his music. The majority of performers shun and resent it. Consequently, the music is little performed, and then primarily at poorly attended concerts before an audience consisting in the main of fellow professionals. At best, the music would appear to be for, of, and by specialists. And then, oh, that's a good one.
Young trees.
That's a good place to stop. So obviously, there's I think salient differences between what he's saying and what Zoe Quinn is saying, and I think what people in the indie games community tend to say about this. I think the main thing is that the main salient difference being that mid 20th century modernist music is overwhelmingly old cis white males, and this current movement is not, or at least has ambitions to not be. But I think there is an interesting overlap between this attitude of expanding the notion of what music can do, expanding the notion of what games can do, and not being limited by how can I put this? Not being limited by things that are pleasant, and leaving room for experiences that reflect the range of experiences that we have as human beings. And I think that's probably a good place for me to stop.
Okay.
And open things up. I don't know if that's over or under.
We both went over, but
Okay.
that's fine. We still have about 25 minutes, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions or any thoughts or anything relevant to the presentation?
I had a question. I think I was like trying to bookmark it before, so I wouldn't forget it. Which was like Liz, you had talked about kind of transitions, like going from underwater to out of water.
Yeah.
And I think there's both like an aesthetic and also a technical, and conceptual, but also a technical thing.
Yeah.
I think I understand conceptually why to do it and like to do it, but I've actually never thought technically how you exactly do it. What are some of your tricks on making it making other versions of songs that are interesting, and then also like technically how do you program that? I guess.
I mean, I think the way that like Proteus does it, just from looking at it, you can open up like the sound file on Proteus, and there are like little 20-minute snippets of sound, and they're all sort of in the same key as each other, and it just like kind of just loads them over top of each other, and it might have some kind of basic things for like fading in and fading out that are controlled in the program. But I don't actually know because I haven't like worked on a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think that's probably what it is. It's like you go underwater and it triggers something, and it sort of fades out when it fades in. Because like N64 is not. They didn't have like a lot of room for a lot of data, and I actually found out from the composer of Grant Kirkhope from Banjo-Kazooie that they used a lot of like percussion, like a lot of like marimbas and stuff like that, specifically because of the limitation of the N64 having a very limited kind of sound set. which I thought was really interesting because I always liked the way that a lot of the music in that game had a very particular kind of feel to it. Also, like, one other interesting thing about it is that the melody sounds like this kind of famous, I think it might be public domain melody. It's about, like, that I used to hear as a kid is called, like, the Teddy Bear's Picnic. And, like, the melody is very similar to that, and I think it's intentional. So it's, like, one of those things that's kind of like a cultural reference, too, that some people might not get. But yeah, anyway, I guess it's, I don't think it's that really that complicated, though. I think it's just a matter of, like, having discrete audio files that you then, like, fade in and do, basic sort of crossfades and stuff like that.
I think there's, like, a couple ways to do it. I mean, one is the kind of way you're describing it, which is the kind of dynamic audio approach where you have these, like, little snippets of things, and sometimes that's very compelling because, you might not hear the same kind of gesture the same way. You might not hear the same gesture twice, like, at all, maybe even. But then there's kind of the way that maybe you're describing where you have different versions of the same track with kind of the same framework, and you're kind of seamlessly transitioning between them. Is that kind of
maybe with different filters or
Oh, okay.
So what I've done before and tends to be fairly effective. I mean, even I discovered recently that even Ren'Py does this, which I didn't realize. Ren'Py is kind of like a visual novel programming environment, and I initially thought that it had almost. It doesn't have great kind of audio capabilities, but I did figure out recently that you can kind of have multiple tracks going simultaneously, and as long as you start them at the same time, and you can control the volume of them freely, you can script it in such a way that you can have most of the tracks muted, and then have one track active, and then you can just kind of crossfade the layers that you need. And so you can kind of create a filtered version and a non-filtered version ahead of time. As far as the compositional aspect goes, I would say, like, as long as your things have the same harmonic framework and line up, like, it'll generally work like 99% of the time. Even if, like, rhythmically it's totally different. As long as it has the same framework, so you can even just kind of, like, line everything up in your, in your DAW or whatever environment you're working in, and just have certain tracks muted and certain tracks active, or copy and paste it. It's.
So it's almost like you're saving then several different remixes or exporting different remixes of your own work.
Exactly.
Or different
Yeah.
versions of your work.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it.
I mean, there are soundtracks that are just remixed versions of the same tune, like Super Mario World, for example, is like that's a little different, but, like, that's kind of a definitely a thing that you see in, like, different sorts of games. One thing I was also going to say is I noticed how, like, a lot of the time the audio sort of frameworks that exist are really poor or, like, really badly supported. Like, oftentimes audio is, like, the thing that is, like, supported the last, and so, like, you are the least capable of doing things because people kind of view it as an afterthought or just don't think much about it. And I also think there's a problem with, like, audio literacy, though, like, really when I often think game designers are guilty of this. Like, can you make some certain kind of sound, and then, like, there's this just, like, expectation that it's supposed to match, this kind of idea, like, I make this sound, it's supposed to make that sound, Whereas, like, there's so much that's possible, and I feel like because of the lack of literacy, it's like, no, why aren't you doing that? Like, why aren't you making that sound? I think, like, doing, like, freelance audio is, like, one of the most frustrating things ever, especially sound effects, because so many people are, like, don't have the kind of literacy to say, you know what, let's do something different, let's do something like Earthbound or something like that has, like, kind of a weirder approach to the sound effects. And oftentimes, like, I guess I'd suggest, like, for game designers and people, it's like, just let your audio person do what they want to do, because they'll probably come up with something interesting, and, like, but people aren't often allowed to be put into that, like, creative mindset, I guess.
I was hoping to hear more about, like, using, like, samples from, like, the internet. Like, whenever I make sound effects for my games, I usually, like, just go, like, a giant library of samples from all over the internet I have. find random things to splice together.
Yeah, I mean that's like what me and Isaac have done too. I think like free sound is one of the best examples because there's a lot of weird copyright issues around sounds, and because of that, like I might grab the HTMI if that's okay. It might be a little weird, but yeah, like one of the best sites for that, like I said, is Freesound because like you know that specifically like what you're using is what you're using, like you have the permission to use and whatever, and like I'm someone who believes in reappropriation and that kind of stuff. So I've done there's like let's see if I can find it. If I can find the two different sort of things that I sampled from. Sorry, my desktop is totally fallen, like incredibly disorganized. I literally Googled like evil witch and made that my wallpaper. Anyway, okay, let's see. So I have this. Apologize for the name of this file. This was in Robert Ying's game Hurt Me Plenty, actually. It's kind of like a more ambient piece, but it has this kind of like melody line. I don't know how well you'd be able to hear it. And it actually has the sample of talking from Crypt Worlds in the background. Just like I like using the same sounds over and over again because sometimes like you really can't hear like they sound. It's so easy to make a sound different like in a like different iterations. So I'm very into kind of just using the same sounds over and over again as kind of a. Oh goodness, I haven't like at all like categorized these, so I have no idea which one it is. Oh, you know what? God, I forget the name of the game. Well, anyway, this essentially the. Sorry, so I have to listen through this one of these. Okay, this is a sample from a Super NES game that like is the basis of the entire tune of this one. It's just slowed down. But because it's an obscure game and like it's sampled down, like probably no one's gonna notice or care. Also, it's like a free game, so I'm not selling it. But I'm actually really into kind of like reappropriating that stuff when you can get away with it. But it's always like kind of a iffy territory, of course. Yeah. Oh, one other thing I was going to show is this is a program that I definitely endorse using. I've used it. There's a program called SFXer, and this is a port by Inkrapara called BSFXer, which has some added tools. Like it has a mixer, so you can load different sounds in with each other, and like it has a randomize button, which is my favorite thing because I always like getting randomized. It's probably going to be super loud, so let's turn it down. I'm just hit the randomize button again. Sometimes I will literally just go through and hit the randomize button and be like, oh, I like that sound, and load it. And then like when I'm working on sound effects, I'll just like load it in and do like tweaking to the filtering and stuff. But this program you can do a lot in just inside the program. Like say I wanted to load that in, but then let's look for another. Let's look for like a jump style sound, or like let's go closer. So let's like put that on the, and you can sort of turn this one down so it does that. You can also, I think, reverse it, yeah. And yeah, there's some cool like features for this program, and it's just bfxer.net. Definitely worth checking out for doing sound effects, and you can make some kind of weird stuff. Also, I can change like if I want to. I like some things about that, but let's say I want to change it to this, or like changes the waveform where it changes. I like that one. But yeah, I get a lot of sounds just from doing that. Like, and I definitely endorse using this program. I think one other obvious one that a lot of people know about is Audacity has some like pretty good features, even though it's obviously limited, and there's still things that you can do with it that are worth checking out. But yeah, I do think that like one issue that I have with music software is a lot of it is built the same way, like sort of in the format that Isaac's use Logic, right?
Yeah.
Where there's this kind of like piano roll, and it's kind of laid out a very certain way, and I think that's one of the barriers to entry for that. I wish that there were more interfaces that were sort of more visual for making music, and I played some games and toys that kind of were tools that do some of that kind of stuff, but it's not like, it's always very limited in scope, and there's not the sort of like full feature set. So it'd be really cool, and I mean, this is just kind of something that I've always struggled with, or wanted, but it would be really cool to have something that is more visual interface, and where you're sort of more interacting with it in a more intuitive way, but there's a wider range of sounds and things that you can make. And I don't know the answer to that, but I would love if someone designed that.
Yeah.
So, like, when you were talking about how you wanted to sort of move away from the idea of using major keys and having minor keys like that, like I was sort of expecting like all right, he's going to talk about like neotonalism now and stuff like that, and then you actually went in the other direction, like back into like motets and like mobile music, which I thought was really interesting. So like I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about like what you think like motivated you to look back like that like into the past, like into like mobile music, instead of more into like things like escaping keys and modes and whatnot entirely.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of a false idea, but I was sort of taking this idea like, oh, this is before they had this notion of major and minor keys, so there's no way they could have this association. Whereas I think if you're making music now that's not tonal or modal, I think it's in reaction to that. So I think that was a difference for me. I don't know how valid that idea is actually, but that was kind of my motivation for it. And it's also something that other composers like Arvo Pärt and other minimalist composers like Steve Reich talks about this too, is that they're more inspired by stuff that happened before 1600 and like after 1900, and they don't really care about anything in between. So like that's kind of like a common thing for mostly minimalist composers, but other composers too, to kind of like go back to this earlier music, to rediscover this earlier music. So yeah, I'm not the only person to do that by any means.
Any other
How
questions?
do you meet up either like at things like this or online? Like, where do you meet people that want you to do soundtracks or sound effects for games and things like that? How do you connect with them?
There are a fucking billion indie game developers at these conferences. It's just a matter of like knowing people and if someone likes your music. It's kind of random though. I mean, like I definitely recommend doing music for like free games or things that you find interesting, even if it's like you're way less likely to make money. I haven't made a lot of money off of doing music for games. Like I have one thing that's coming up that's like maybe will be a little bit more money, but that hasn't been the primary thing. And it's actually kind of like I used to go to like MagFest a lot, which is down in Baltimore or National Harbor, Maryland, I guess, and there's a lot of chip community there, and I felt like everyone that I ran into wanted to be a game composer. And that's not a bad thing, but it is very hard because it's like making music is kind of a rewarding experience in itself, and it like comes with some of the like a lot less people want to do sound effects, for example. Because like that's a lot more technical, and there's a lot more fussing, and you sort of have to compromise kind of your will to the game more a lot of the time, and so it is tremendously hard to find sound gigs. And it is really just a matter of knowing people and knowing who's working on things. But I've at least tried to work on things that I think are interesting, if nothing else. And but yeah, I don't think that it's easy. Like, I literally had somebody who's, like, a fairly well-known artist who makes music, music outside of games, who wanted to make music for games, and he, like, emailed me, and I told him, like, essentially, like, well, if you want to do something that's, like, of music for a game that's, like, kind of really interesting, you're probably not going to get a lot of money for it, but you might get money off of selling it, because you have, like, But you know, I guess there's this idea that like, you know, there's all this money coming in or whatever, but in reality, it is pretty hard, and you do have to be pretty persistent. And even like picking the most interesting things are not necessarily the things that are liable to like make the most money or anything like that. So, not trying to discourage people, but
yeah, I'm not necessarily asking about the money part. I think when I do like beat production for rappers or other kinds of things, you send like 100 tracks, 200 tracks, 300. You just like put a million fucking things out there, and they're like, I like this one.
Yeah.
And you're like, fuck. But you know what I mean? You spend just put a million, but I don't know if it works that same. It seems like it doesn't work exactly the way that it's.
I mean, like if you go to conferences and you meet people, that's like one of the biggest things. Then like, and then you send them like, you know, your music and whatever. Like, then I think they're way more likely to respond. You know, if you met them in the flesh and everything like that. So yeah, like especially like a conference at mostly game developers, like there's less sort of, you know, just musicians there, and you know, if you know a lot of people making games, it's easier to find, you know, and someone working on something interesting, and you know, it's always worth trying to like push people to do more interesting things with their sound, because I think a lot of like game developers are curious about it, but they don't necessarily think about it, or you know, it isn't something that they've sort of considered before. Any more questions or any comments or anything?
If I could just share something that just sparked in my memory, the Rescue on Fractalus.
I've heard of that.
When it's a 8-bit game, but it kind of renders.
I can find a video of it.
So there's when you land to rescue your pilots, and it's a very, very simple game. There's like engine sounds and door opens and stuff like that, but there's this knock that still to this day just like horrifies me, because you don't know when it's going to come, you don't know with which urgency it's going to happen. Just to go with effectiveness in sound in games, it adds an insane amount of depth to this normally simple game.
Yeah. One game that I was thinking of also is, I actually talked about this in my talk about kind of abstraction and art games, was this old game called Deus Ex Machina, or Mach, I don't know how to pronounce it. But it's a Spectrum game.
Deus Ex Machina.
Well, okay, there you go. And it's on the Spectrum. Well, there are different versions of it, but like they recorded all the audio and voiceover and all the sound, and it's on a tape, and you play the tape and you just sync it with, it syncs with like the experience, because they didn't have the technological capability for it. So the audio kind of carries so much of the game. It carries all the music and the narration, and as you like walk through, you know, it's very like sort of abstract, but it adds this kind of like character to the game where you're kind of interacting with things, but it's still on a timer basically.
I see it all.
Yeah, this was like kind of an ambitious project for 1983. You know, a few years before Mario came out.
I take you true.
But yeah.
I give the
Anything else you guys are curious about or want to talk about? We have a few more minutes, like 5 more minutes.
What are some of your favorite? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was I noticed that like with trackers, like it seems like there's a lot of people like I guess you mentioned how like you feel like piano roll stuff is sort of not like very beginner friendly, and then like I feel like that sort of stuff is. Like,
well, one thing I like about trackers is you can play with the keyboard and it just picks the note.
Anyway. Yeah, but I've noticed that like people who have like a lot of musical background and are used to like music being like left to right and whatnot, they don't get this at all.
No, yeah.
I wondered like if like that. I guess I wondered if you have like any thoughts on that sort of like that like how it's beginner friendly but not like expert friendly almost.
I don't know. I think it's like it's just a different way of thinking about music, and given that it's on a grid especially, that was one of the biggest things that I had to get over, because like, you know, you think about performing music, you think of it being kind of like a continuous or flowing thing, and like at the very least like piano rolls are like a little bit more flexible, and this is just on a straight grid, and it can be hard to, sorry, it can be hard to visualize.
I think the hexadecimal values that they often use are really annoying, just foreign feeling for someone. Like I struggled with that for a while when I was trying to learn a tracker when I was young.
Yeah, these use hexadecimal, so like, so you can change it here, but 255 is obviously FF, so that can be confusing. I don't know. The one thing I was thinking of is, I think like it more corresponds to a kind of like programming mindset, because I think this was like easy to make an interface kind of like this for like, you know, old trackers, but also like Super Nintendo music is actually sort of a sampler in some sort of module format that you can actually, there's actually a program that extracts them, and you can load in Super Nintendo tracks into ModPlug and play them, and you can look at all the samples and all the individual tracks, which is really cool. Because before that, like literally what they did with NES and things like that is they literally programmed in like assembly language code to make all the sounds, and like as the sort of tools developed, and you get some really interesting kind of... I had a blog for a while called Sounds from the Abyss that was just kind of about strange game music, and let's see if I can find... you like from composers trying to do something interesting with the limitations, you get stuff that kind of sounds like this. It says 1-bit music. I don't know exactly what that means. Okay. But yeah, like it's manipulating this like very small, limited like array of sounds, trying to make like kind of a really interesting piece of music with it. Tim Fallon is like kind of a composer who's known for being kind of like the master of doing this on different systems, and he has like very prog influenced music. But yeah, like wait, what did you ask? I'm sorry.
Oh, I didn't really ask.
Oh.
I was just like about trackers and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think like you said, mentioned like you're not sure what like 1-bit music meant, but I think like what it means in that case, at least what it sounds like, is like they there is like only 1 bit separating like the highest possible loudness from the noise floor.
Okay.
So like it's like all the music there is just one square wave.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, like and one big program for making chiptunes, and like there's LSDJ, which is essentially a tracker. I think it's just an easy format to like visualize, and it's like that's one of the biggest problems that like piano rolls have, is having everything on its screen at once and controlling all this stuff. And trackers, you can sort of fake effects and like do like reverb effects by like, you know, that's like one of the classic examples of like putting something here and then putting it delayed with about like half or a third volume, and it goes do 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 do. You know,
But then
like,
you don't see like note lengths and stuff like a piano roll might show. So
no,
it's
you
almost
don't.
Like you get like something from either.
But it's I feel like it might be a little less like visually cluttered or something like.
Yeah,
so
that's the main thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Family Tracker is also a big sort of it's free program that you can make sort of NES chiptunes, and you can actually export them as NSF files, which is like the format. And there are a lot of people who do that. So yeah, I think like one thing I got really into was I think the particularities of like the limitations of a lot of old game music is what's interesting about a lot, and that's something that like we forget about now. You know, I like a lot of old chiptunes and stuff, but like I think if we like can choose those limitations for ourselves and like have that be sort of defined by the character of the game, or you know what the kind of design intent is, then that's like really kind of an interesting and new way of using music, rather than just kind of going with the default like mindset. And you know, like a lot of people will just be like, oh, it's like 8-bit, so we put chiptune. But then there's stuff that's like 16 or 32-bit looking that looks like it could be on a PlayStation, but still has chiptune music for like, and we don't perceive that as being weird. even though that is actually really just as weird as anything else.
Sometimes the juxtaposition's super interesting. Like
Yeah.
something that's like maybe classical recorded like incredibly high fidelity against
Yeah.
like two-tone art or something like just
Yeah,
beautiful.
and the way that the music has a relationship with the game can be a really interesting thing, and it doesn't have to sort of go one-on-one in the way that like people think about it.
I have one question if there's
Okay.
still time.
Yeah, there's
Last one.
Like
Okay.
yeah, this is the last one probably.
I'm wondering if what experience you guys have with middleware like Fmod or I don't know what Unity has. I'm assuming it has something, or like Wise I think it's called. Like just because it seems like there's so few options out there, and I have pretty limited experience with them. But I'm wondering what you think.
Do you have a lot of experience?
Not really. I mean, I've looked at them. I mean, I would just say that yeah, I would say, kind of approach it the way you would approach anything else, and just kind of like dive into it. I mean, I think it's more like, for me at least, it's sort of like, if I need to learn something for a project, I'll learn it for that project. And so it's more of a matter of like, and it just so happens that another project I'm involved in involved one of those kinds of middleware. I mean, yeah, RenPy has some rudimentary kind of scripting thing that's similar, but I would say it's actually not, from what I can tell, it's actually not that difficult. It's kind of just like a graphical
Fmod
interface.
seems simple.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the general consensus. Yeah, yeah, I think it's more of like a learn by doing thing with something like that.
I feel like it's like the problem is not really like with that project. The problem is not like the user side so much as like the actual like how many game engines have actually implemented.
Right.
Can you explain what Fmod is, just for the sake of?
Fmod is a what's called a middleware program for audio. So what it lets you do as a sound designer is it looks kind of like the DAW. You plug in your sounds and whatnot, and you set up like how an event would work. Like, so for example, let's say you're designing a car engine sound, so you can say like what is going to be the start of the car engine sound, and then what's going to be the loop point, how it's going to loop, and you can put in parameters to say, okay, if the RPM is this, then it will be higher pitch, and that lets you do that without programming it. So it's like it sort of emancipates like this, like the sound, interactive sound design from the programming side to the sound designer side.
Yeah, the designer can build a lot of really complex, interesting things without touching any of the program. The programmer then just triggers the right events, just the designer would have to hand some notes over maybe. But it's pretty powerful. Fmod especially, I feel like, is designed really well, where the tool set's kind of limited, but within that limitation you have like there's a lot of possibility.
Yeah, and that is often a big problem with games, is that like there's kind of the sound and then implementing it into the code, and you need a programmer to do that, and like the programmer is not necessarily going to understand the creative.
It takes too much time too to do all those
things. So you might as well put those tools in the hands of the sound designer. Yeah, I actually saw a talk. I guess we have to wrap up basically, but I saw a talk at GDC. It was a guy who composed for one of the Monkey Island games, but also Grim Fandango, and he was showing that like he had like a little map of all the sounds, like all the music and how they were connected to the room layouts, and sort of how it was like a visualization of all of that stuff.
iMuse is what they had, right?
Yeah, iMuse is what it was called. And that really like seems to help tremendously with like actually being able to visualize, because that's one of my biggest problems, like making sound effects for something. Like people say, can you make the sound effect, and literally not even have a build to show me that like where the sound effect is loaded in, so I have no idea how it sounds in the game. And like, so if you can give people, like if you're a designer or something, you give people those tools at some level, like it's really helpful, and you can do a lot more just, even with a limited tool set.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
You had mentioned something of challenges to accessibility. I think you did.
Yeah.
Did you cover that? Did I miss that?
Well, we were talking about how. Well, I mean, I can talk about it a little. I was talking about how the piano roll is not like a great visualizer for things, and that like there's kind of like format where.
So accessibility within the composition, not within the audience.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking about accessibility of like programs.
Well, thank you. And yeah, the that knock just you don't know when the pilot's going to come up, and it's either a pilot or an alien. You don't know whether to open the door or not. And, just how they managed to like add this like deep human, especially if it's not human, emotion into a
yeah, it's just like one sound.
Thanks.